The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and joining me is my wife and co-host Beth.
Hello, everyone.
So we have a little bit of housekeeping before we get into this week's stories. We would like to remind everyone to check out our merch on our TeePublic store.
We have several cool designs that you can get on all kinds of products, from clothing to coffee mugs.
Also, if you haven't checked out our premium bonus episodes yet, please give one a try.
There are a bunch of them on all different topics, just waiting for you to check them out. They're just $3 an episode, and the money you spend goes directly back into our production costs each month. And lastly, if you haven't joined our Where Our Minds Wander Facebook page, you might want to do that. We post pictures and updates, and it's a great place to find like-minded people. Or you can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, or TikTok.
So I guess that about wraps it up for this week's housekeeping. But we also have an update to share.
Yes, we do. We are sad to announce that British singer Brocard, she was the woman we featured in our ghost marriage episode, well, she's divorced her ghost husband, Eduardo.
Right, and for all of you that may have missed that episode, which is episode 12, Brocard considered herself married to a Victorian ghost. But just this past week, she announced that she and Eduardo are no longer together.
She cited his ongoing affair with Marilyn Monroe as the reason for the demise of their marriage. And she said she should have known better than to marry such a free spirit.
Well, we wish her the best of luck. Maybe things will work out down the line. And maybe if it doesn't, she can find somebody that isn't such a playboy. It's got to be hard competing with Marilyn Monroe, whether she's in spirit form or not.
I would think so.
Tough act to follow.
Yes.
Alrighty, let's get into tonight's stories.
Agatha Christie is certainly one of the best-known mystery authors of all time. There's just no question about that. She wrote 66 detective novels and 14 short stories that have sold over 2 billion copies. Her play, The Mousetrap, is the longest-running play in the world. It has been in production somewhere at all times since 1952. What there are questions about is the time in 1926 when Agatha Christie went missing for 11 days. To this day, no one really knows why, and Christie, the master of embedding clues in her writing, never really offered any solid clues to her real-life mystery either. She married Archibald Christie in 1914. Archibald was a pilot in the Royal Flying Corps, and he served in World War I in France. Agatha also played a role in the war. She volunteered in the dispensary at the local Red Cross hospital. She learned a lot about poisons while she volunteered there, which figured heavily in her detective novels. She was so accurate with her knowledge of poisons that she once wrote a review in the Pharmaceutical Journal about just how accurate her use of poisons were in her own fiction writing. Their daughter, Rosalind, was born in 1919, and by all accounts, Agatha and Archie were happily married. Her first novel, starring Hercule Poirot, was published in 1920. It was titled The Mysterious Affair at Styles. Styles was actually the name of the 12-bedroom home they purchased together in Sunningdale. But 6 years after the publication of her first book, things began to fall apart. Archie was frequently away from home, and when Agatha's mother died, he callously told her that he didn't do well with death, and he refused to attend the funeral or help her to clean out her mother's home. Agatha became increasingly depressed and was later quoted as saying that this was the beginning of a nervous breakdown. The final straw was when Archie announced that he had fallen in love with a family friend, a younger woman named Nancy Neal. He wanted a divorce. Agatha refused, and from August until December of 1926, the couple tried to reconcile. But on December 3rd, Archie announced that he was going away for the weekend with some friends, and Agatha was not invited. Archie left, and Agatha wrote a letter to her secretary that said she would not be returning to the house that night. She made sure the house staff knew to watch over Rosalind, and then Agatha got into her Morris Cowley automobile and left the house. The next day, her abandoned car was found on the slope of a chalk quarry, stuck in some bushes. The bushes had actually stopped the car from plummeting all the way to the bottom. The headlights were still on, and all that remained inside the car were some various clothing items and an expired license. According to the police report, which is housed in the National Archives, quote, "The car was found in such a position as to indicate that some unusual proceeding had taken place, the car being found halfway down a grassy slope, well off the main road, with its bonnet buried in some bushes, as if it had got out of control. In the car was found a fur coat, a dressing case containing various articles of ladies' wearing apparel, and a driving license, indicating that the owner was Mrs. Agatha Christie of Sunningdale." End quote. Police feared that Agatha had been on her way to drown herself in the Silent Pool, a popular spot for day hikers just 4 miles away from where her car was found. They began looking for her, of course. 1,000 police officers were involved in the search. One newspaper offered a 100-pound reward, which today would be about 6,000 pounds. As soon as the news hit newspapers, volunteers flocked to join in the search. One man came forward and reported to police that he had seen Agatha and that she was, quote, "sparsely dressed for such an inclement morning, and that she appeared strange in her manner." End quote. On December 6th, her disappearance made the front page of the New York Times. Rumors flew back in England that she had drowned herself, or Archie had murdered her, or she was framing Archie for murder. There was even one rumor that she'd fled her house because it was haunted. Prominent people stepped in to assist the search effort. For example, Home Secretary William Joynson Hicks put pressure on the police, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle presented a trusted spirit medium that he knew with one of Agatha's gloves, hoping to find some guidance as to where to look for her.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is everywhere.
Everywhere.
What wasn't he involved in?
He was a busy man.
That he was.
According to newspapers, on December 13th, another massive search was mounted near where her car was found. It included 6 trained bloodhounds, a crate of Airedale Terriers, several retrievers, Alsatian police dogs, and 15,000 human volunteers. On the 14th, police discovered some interesting items: a torn-up postcard, another fur coat, a loaf of bread, 2 children's books, and some bottles labeled poison and opium. Meanwhile, police questioned both Archie and his mistress, Nancy Neal, extensively. Perhaps they thought there may have been some truth to the rumors that Archie had murdered his wife. At the very least, they hoped to get some sort of helpful information from them. The same day that the police discovered those strange items, they received a puzzling phone call from the head waiter at the Swan Hydropathic Hotel in Yorkshire. He said he had his eye on a guest who who he thought might be Agatha Christie. This guest had signed in with the name Teresa Neal and claimed she was from South Africa. She was lively and outgoing, but still, the waiter was suspicious. The hotel was 184 miles north of where Agatha's car was found. But based on the fact that Neal was also the surname of Archie's mistress, and South Africa was once a beloved spot for Agatha and Archie, it was a pretty good lead. Archie accompanied police to the hotel and then sat quietly in a corner of the hotel dining room to wait. Eventually, Teresa Neal entered the room and sat alone at another table. She opened a newspaper and began to read. Across the front of the newspaper was a huge article about Agatha's disappearance. When Archie approached her, Agatha appeared not to recognize him at all and was puzzled by his insistence that she was his wife. When he finally convinced her to leave the hotel, she allegedly insisted on keeping him waiting down in the lobby while she changed into an evening gown first. Agatha had been found alive and safe. The couple holed up at Agatha's sister's house so reporters couldn't hound her. Archie believed she was suffering from amnesia and possibly a concussion from when the car crashed into the bushes. 2 separate doctors agreed that this was the case. But still, everyone wanted to know why she had disappeared for 11 days and how she had gotten to Yorkshire. Agatha only gave one interview where she discussed any of it. In it, she claimed that she only recalled the events after she'd been through psychotherapy sessions. She said that when she left Sunningdale on December 3rd, she was contemplating suicide. She drove around aimlessly until she accidentally crashed the car. She hit her head in the crash. But she got out of the car and somehow made it to a train station where she hopped on a train to Yorkshire. She checked into the Swan Hydropathic Hotel under the fake name Teresa Neal, but she wasn't purposely trying to hide her identity in any way. She used her normal handwriting. She wasn't wearing a disguise. She ate in the dining room that night and then danced. She said, quote, "For 24 hours I wandered in a dream, and then found myself in Harrogate as a well-contented and perfectly happy woman who believed she had just come from South Africa." End quote. Public sentiment turned rather nasty at this point, with many people suspecting it was all a publicity stunt to promote her writing. Others felt that she had tried to get back at Archie for cheating on her, but her disappearance became such a spectacle that she just didn't know how to get out of it. More modern-day interpretations is that Agatha had fallen into a fugue state, a temporary dissociative disorder in which she honestly believed that she was someone else. They cite the recent loss of her mother and the breakdown of her marriage as the causes. There was also some sentiment, shortly after she was found, that the money and effort put into searching for her was excessive. Inquiries were made into just how much the search cost. The official response was that newspapers had exaggerated their descriptions of the search efforts and that no cost was incurred by the police department and that no more effort was put into her search than any other missing person search. However, I also found one piece of information that, to me, was pretty interesting. The police apparently asked Archie to help fund the search, and he refused, saying it was, quote, entirely a police matter, end quote. And if this is true, then I think it says more about Archie than it says about the police. Agatha and Archie divorced 15 months after her return. Archie married Nancy Neal. Agatha, of course, went on to be one of the most prolific and best-loved detective novelists of all time. In 1930, she remarried, this time to an archaeologist named Max Mallowan. She paid for all of his digs, and she accompanied him every year to the Middle East to take part in excavations. She became an expert at cleaning artifacts with a brush and her face cream.
Kind of strange.
I think it's so cool. It was like one of those little tidbits where I was like, it has nothing really to do with anything, but it's so cool, I just have to mention it.
Yeah, a brush and her face cream.
Her face cream.
Unusual.
So, really, there isn't any answer to why Agatha Christie went missing for 11 days, which is pretty ironic for a mystery detective writer. Hey, did you know? People have kept locks of hair as mementos for centuries. But what about using it to embroider a sheet that covered your husband in the Tower of London before he was beheaded for treason in 1716? That might be just what Anna Maria Radcliffe did. Embroidered with leaves and flowers, the bed sheet also bears the inscription, quote, "The sheet off my dear, dear lord's bed in the wretched Tower of London, February 1716, Anne C. of Derwent Waters," end quote. Historians speculate that she used not just strands of her own hair, but also hair from her husband's severed head, which was sewn back onto his body before it was given to her. It might just be the most heartbreaking love note ever written. Who'da thunk it? So for your story, you're talking about another mysterious woman, aren't you?
Yes, I am. The Blood Countess was a real-life person who has been a very popular character in both print and digital media for centuries. Countless movies include characters based on her legendary, bloodthirsty ways. Numerous books have potentially used her as a basis for their characters as well, including the super popular A Song of Fire and Ice series, otherwise known as Game of Thrones. One of Beth's favorite books, Anno Dracula, has a character based on the Blood Countess also. Some historians of literature even think Bram Stoker based Dracula on the Blood Countess and not Vlad Tepes. If you search for the Blood Countess in popular culture on Wikipedia, the list of examples extends for pages, many, many more pages than her actual biography. And if you're wondering, who is the Blood Countess? Who are you talking about? All I have to say is, she's the Hungarian noblewoman who murdered 600 village girls because she thought bathing in their blood would give her immortality. And now you're probably going, oh yeah, that kind of sounds familiar. But even if you're not, even if you're just saying to yourself, wait, there was a Hungarian noblewoman who killed 600 girls so she could bathe in their blood, well, that's okay too, because tonight I'm going to tell you all about Elizabeth Bathory. Was she bloodthirsty? Yes, she was. Did she kill young virgin girls? She certainly did. Did stories about her grow over time into something even more monstrous than she actually was? Well, the answer to that is also yes. Kind of. Elizabeth Bathory was born in Hungary in 1560. Her family ruled both Transylvania and Poland. So she was part of a very powerful family, and she grew up in a castle surrounded by wealth. She was well educated, which was unusual for females, and she spoke several languages. She did have health problems that began at a young age, including epilepsy and migraines, and she apparently would fly into fits of rage. Now, although her family was very powerful and wealthy, they were also prone to extreme violence. Although, to be fair, I think the world of 1560 was probably full of extreme violence. However, it seems like Elizabeth's family was more violent than most. At a very young age, she reportedly witnessed her father's men capture a peasant that they had suspected of stealing, and they sewed him into the stomach of a dying horse. He was left there to die inside the dying animal.
That's gross.
It's pretty harsh.
That's gross, yeah.
At the age of 13, she was engaged to Count Ferenc Nadoshti, who was 18 at the time. Some accounts claim she gave birth to an illegitimate child during their engagement. She and the Count were married 2 years later in 1575, when Elizabeth was only 15. She gave birth to their first child in 1585 and had 5 children total, although 2 of them died as infants. She and the Count moved into Nodosti Castle, and by all accounts, her husband was also a very violent man. One account says that he restrained a young girl, lathered her in honey, and then let insects attack her. But what I find interesting about this is that the account also says he did it to please Elizabeth. He also gave Elizabeth spiked gloves to wear when she needed to thrash her own servants. Elizabeth's aunt introduced her to a group of people who are rumored to be sorcerers, witches, and alchemists, and she also introduced her to orgies. In 1602, a letter written by a priest outlined the excessive cruelty both the Count and Elizabeth showed towards their servants. So it's not really clear if Elizabeth had an inclination towards violence and torture, or if she merely was caught up in the taste of the influential people around her. But either way, at some point, I think she needs to be held accountable for her part in things that were done. When the Count died in 1604, Elizabeth moved into Choctaw Castle, which is in present-day Slovakia. Soon after, her reputation as a malicious and bloodthirsty woman took root. There were horrific stories about the way she treated servant girls. Accounts say that she would push needles into their fingers if they displeased her. Or if she truly wanted to punish them, she'd whip them with stinging nettles, cut off their noses, or cut off their lips. At times, she was known to actually bite them on the shoulder or even on their breasts. She was also known to burn the genitals of young women who displeased her. In the colder months, she would order young women to strip and then get them into ice baths until they died of hypothermia.
Jeez,
Yeah, she had some pretty nasty tortures. I wouldn't want to piss her off.
Malicious and bloodthirsty is putting it lightly.
According to linguist and author Tony Thorne, villagers were so afraid of her that they would hide their daughters in the hope that Elizabeth wouldn't catch sight of them and invite them into her service. In all, Elizabeth allegedly murdered 600 village girls between 1604 and 1610, and she bathed in their blood because she thought it would give her eternal youth. All of this makes for an incredibly dark and disturbing plot for a book or movie, which is why so many writers and filmmakers have done so. And the really disturbing part is that she was a real person and she really did most of these things. The end of her reign of torture came in 1610, when she was suspected of murdering fellow noblewomen. You see, if a nobleman or noblewoman murdered village girls, it wasn't considered illegal, but killing other members of nobility was. The King of Hungary, Matthias II, had heard enough rumors about Elizabeth torturing and murdering other noblewomen, and he gave the green light to open up an investigation. When judicial magistrate Count Thurzo arrived at Elizabeth's doorstep on December 29, 1610, he allegedly interrupted her right in the middle of torturing someone. He arrested her immediately, but because she was nobility and her imprisonment was basically house arrest, she was forbidden to leave the castle. During his inquest, Thurzo took 289 witness statements. One said that they had come across the book where Elizabeth had written down the names of over 600 women she had killed. However, the book was never found. Out of the 289 witness statements, 250 of them were pure hearsay. He also arrested 4 of Elizabeth's servants and tortured them into confessing. All of them claimed that they had nothing to do with the murders, but that they were made to bury the bodies. But they didn't agree on the number of bodies and said it was anywhere between 36 and 51. Thurzo convicted Elizabeth Bathory for the murder of 80 women. Each of the 4 servants swore they were innocent and tried to blame each other and Elizabeth. They also tried to blame a fifth servant named Darvulia, who was the governess, but Darvulia had already died at this point. 3 of the 4 servants were sentenced to death. What happened to the 4th is unknown. But the only thing that happened to Elizabeth was, like I said, house arrest. She lived inside her castle, locked away until her death at age 54 in 1614. But beginning in the 1980s, historians started to question the validity of the horrific claims made against Elizabeth Bathory. Was she really as horrible as historical accounts said she was? Now, the answer may be both yes and no. Several researchers like Tony Thorne, who I mentioned earlier, suggest that Elizabeth was the victim of a smear campaign. You see, the Habsburg court, which happened to rule a good portion of Europe, including parts of Hungary, owed her money. And they weren't happy that she supported her nephew, who was actively against them. Remember before when I said that it was King Matthias II who initially started the investigation into her? He was a Habsburg. If Elizabeth was in prison, then her sons-in-laws could control her money and property, and essentially, she would no longer be a threat to any of them, politically or financially. Now, back to the claim that Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, bathed in the blood of her victims in order to maintain eternal youth. There is zero evidence that this ever happened. You would think, with 289 witnesses, that someone would have mentioned it. In fact, it wasn't even said about her until 100 years after her death. Now, there's no question that Elizabeth Bathory did some horrendous, unforgivable things. There's no question that the media continues to perpetuate the myth that she bathed in human blood. And there's no doubt that whether it was embellished or not, her story makes for one dark and disturbing tale. She certainly has lived on in infamy in hundreds of books, movies, poems, and plays.
So interesting. I mean, she's a rarity, right? Because she was female. So historically, men have done all kinds of horrendous things like she did. But the fact that she was a woman, I think, is what makes it so unique and why people are constantly not impressed is not the right word. They're enthralled by her story and why writers keep using her, I think.
Yeah, she was a ruthless bitch.
She definitely had some mental health issues, I think.
I mean, she really is like Dracula.
Yes.
She lives in this big-ass castle. You can kind of picture with a black robe and blood dripping from her teeth.
Yeah. And I had heard something somewhere about a treatment for epilepsy. You had said that she had epilepsy?
Mm-hmm.
I had heard somewhere, read somewhere, that one of the treatments was to put the blood of healthy people on your lips because they thought that that would treat epilepsy. But then when I looked it up on my own, I was looking up like medieval cures for epilepsy, yada, yada. I couldn't find anything about putting the blood. I could find things about bloodletting.
Yeah, well.
But not putting it on your, because I was like, oh, well, that would be interesting if that was the tidbit of truth.
Right.
And then people, embellished it so greatly.
Right. Well, I have never heard anything about that, but I wouldn't doubt it because they did so many crazy things back there thinking that they were cures, you
Right.
know? But she takes the cake.
She does take the cake.
And she eats it too.
Well, as always, if you'd like to know more about the topics we covered, you can always go to our show notes for our sources.
Yeah, and if you'd like to meet us and you're into Bigfoot, mark September 30th on your calendars. Beth and I will be at the 2023 Whitehall Sasquatch Festival, and we'd love to meet you.
Yes, we would, and that's Whitehall, New York, and it's on September 30th.
Well, Beth, that about wraps it up for this episode. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Minds Wander.
See you soon.